our guest speaker today. And as I said, he's come all the way from Brazil, not necessarily this morning, though I would add. Alan Ripoll is here on a one-year study. I'm not sure what the word is, study tour, anyway. As a visiting scholar at the Sunshine Coast University to look at the specific issues surrounding some very interesting similarities between Indigenous culture in this part of Australia, southeast Queensland, and in certain parts of Brazil. So without any further ado, I think we should introduce Alan now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, that's nice. Well, thank you for your kind words. And well, my name is Alan. I'm a biologist. I'm from Brazil. And I am a visiting scholar at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And well, my research is related to this topic here. I am doing my postdoc here on the Sunshine Coast, and I'm going to explain during my presentation a little bit about my work here and in Brazil. At first, I'd like to apologize for my English. I know that I have a very strong accent and sometimes it's difficult to understand, but please do not hesitate to interrupt me and ask to repeat again, and okay, feel free to do that. And well, you see here Polish, but my work is related to Indigenous people in Brazil as well. This work is based on my project here at USC, the Aboriginal Australian and the Polish immigrant, two stories, two references to the future. And I'm going to explain a little bit about this. It's a comparison involving these two groups, but it's related to the Indigenous people in Brazil as well. And before talking about some topics here, I'm going to put here a very short introduction in order to present you some aspects that I think they are very important to understand how Indigenous people are organized in Brazil and how were Polish immigrants in the 1900s organized in Brazil, because before that we had an interaction with these two peoples through a kind of a tree that surely you know. It's an Araucaria tree that's better known as Bunya tree here in Australia, and in Brazil we have another name for that, but these similar trees were related to these two groups: Aboriginal people here in Australia, Indigenous people, and Polish people in Brazil. So before showing you this tree, I'm going to put here a small video where you can see how our planet started to be organized. You know, we have here the Pangea, you know, and the separation of the continents. We have South America here, pay attention, and Australia being separated here. You know, and this organization was essential for understanding how these trees were separated along the time. And okay, and we have this organization from that Pangea, then the organization that we called Laurasia and Gondwana, like that, and the modern world with South America here. This Brazil is more or less here, and we have Australia on the other side. But they were linked by means of this big amount of land here, and this tree that I'm going to talk about now, Araucaria, was spread by this region here, involving Australia and South America, especially the south part of South America. And these were the images that we had at that time, the Mesozoic Era. The Mesozoic Era includes 3 periods, including the Jurassic period, where we had dinosaurs, other animals, and here we can see some examples of the Araucaria. This is more similar to the one that we have in the south of Brazil, and in some countries near there, like Argentina, Chile, it's more like that. And here another a tree that is more similar to the Bunya tree that you have here in Australia. But these trees are so old that we had during the Mesozoic era, and they were living with animals like that. We have some other pictures, and you can observe that the trees are always there, So they are very old kinds of plants. Here we have a current photo in Arizona desert, where we have some examples of petrified wood. This petrified wood, we have some species related to Araucaria between this wood here, the petrified wood, but the most interesting aspect is we don't have this kind of tree in North America anymore, only the South America. And we can see more precise information like here, petrified wood in Arizona. And they are Araucaria trees, but we don't have alive trees there anymore. And now in South America, this is not the tree that we have in Brazil, but it's a very similar tree, and it belongs to the Araucaria family as well. The family is called Araucariaceae, as we're going to say lately. But this tree, the scientific name is Araucaria araucano. Araucano is an indigenous name in Chile. This is a Chilean Patagonia, and we have the Chilean Patagonia and the Argentinian Patagonia. But this tree we have in Chile and Argentina and in Brazil. And as we can see, this is very similar to the old pictures that we were seeing before. And maybe you recognize this structure. This is the reproductive structure that we have, and it's a fossil of that reproductive structure, and it belongs to the tree that we have seen before. Another kind of structure. And here, Araucaria. Araucaria is the gender, is the general name, and we have some information about this kind of tree. We have 19 extant species in the genus, with a Gondwanan natural distribution in New Caledonia especially, where 13 species are endemic, Norfolk Island, Eastern Australia, New Guinea, Argentina, Chile, and southern Brazil. It's a big group. And if you pay attention, we had in the past all these species here, but the ones that we are going to pay attention belongs to this section, Araucaria, where we have the Araucaria that we have in Brazil, Araucaria Angustifolia, that's called Parana Pine, and here the Araucaria Bidwillii in Australia, the Bunya, the most famous name by Aboriginal people, but people today prefer to call as Bunya tree or Bunya pine, and Eastern Australia especially. And these are extinct species. Well, this is Brazil, my country. Here we have the capital, Brasilia, and the biggest city that we have in Brazil is São Paulo. The place that I considered in my research, my doctoral research there, was Curitiba, the capital of Paraná. This is the state of Paraná. And maybe you have heard about Foz do Iguaçu, where the waterfalls are. Yes, it's a very famous place. Maybe it's the second most visited place in Brazil after Rio. And we have Araucaria on this place as well. And it's a very special place that we have there. But this work was developed on the opposite side of the state that's called Curitiba. That's the capital of Paraná. And Curitiba today is a famous city for public transport. It's a kind of a reference for many cities, many countries around the world. The public transport, especially the bus, uses, a bus station, connected kinds of gates, so it's used in many places. The city today is more famous because of that. But considering the natural aspects that we have in Curitiba and other places in Paraná, I wouldn't say that we have public transport or other technologies as more important things before Araucaria. If you pay attention, Curi, Cori, Curi, Curiúva are indigenous names. It are Tupi words that means Curitiba. Curitiba means a place where we have a lot of curi, a lot of the plants called as Araucaria there. This is our Araucaria in Brazil. If you pay attention, the Parana Pine or the Brazilian pine is a tree that is similar to the one that we have in Chile, but the branch is special because we don't have knots along it. No, and it was a very special tree by means of construction, and we have an organization that I'm going to talk about these more deeply ahead. These are the reproductive structures that we have there. It's more or less similar to the ones that we have in Bunya tree here. The organization varies according to the tree, but we have a big example of reproductive structure like that can achieve 40 centimeters easily. So this is the seed, isolated seed, and the most interesting aspect that we have there, that is the seed is disseminated by this bud. Yes, and this is a symbol for our state. This bird was responsible for disseminating this tree, and it's in extinction, unfortunately, but we consider this animal very special there because this tree is a node example of history that we have in Brazil. So we have a lot of artistic pictures related to Araucaria in Brazil, like that, involving indigenous people. And there with the waterfalls, and we can observe some Araucarias there, and indigenous people and the local animals like macaws, involving. And another completely different context. Here, Queensland. If you pay attention here, southeast Queensland is a place where we have Araucarias as well. More especially on Bunya Mountains, where we have the biggest group of Bunya trees here in Australia, are very concentrated on this area. And near here, we have the Blackall Range, in the hinterlands of the Sunshine Coast. And these are the images related to the Bunya tree that we have here in Australia. They are very similar to the ones that we have in South America, but the structure is a little bit different on this, on the branch, and on the reproductive association that we have on this tree. But they are similar externally and a bit different when we talk about seeds, like that. Coming back to Brazil, my work involved initially the Araucaria, the Parana Pine, as we call there, but two groups at the same time. The indigenous people, the originally Brazilians, and the Polish immigrants that had gone to Brazil during the 19th century. Why did the Polish go to Brazil during the 19th century? Well, there were a lot of reasons for that. They were involved in many wars in Europe. They received some attractions from the Brazilian government, like they were offered a lot of big amounts of lands for developing their agricultural practices. And in Brazil, there was a public policies related to whitenization, the way of turning the population whiter than before. So many aspects were involved during this migration from Poland to Brazil, but some of these aspects were that. And my doctoral project was related to comparing the identity between the descendants of Polish immigrants and the elements that would compose their universe of living, involving the Araucaria, the land that was used for agriculture and things like that. And my project recovered the process initiated with the Polish immigration to the state of Parana, southern Brazil, which would lead the Araucaria wooden house to become a reminiscent of the interrelations between environment and architecture. These Polish immigrants were responsible for organizing 91 settlements in the south of Brazil, but many other immigrants like German, Ukrainian, Spanish, Portuguese, again, they had gone to Brazil. We had more or less 20 nationalities going to Brazil more or less at the same time, before the First World War, and especially during this period. My research considered this time, 1871 and 2016, as a period that was strategical for understanding this flux that we have from Europe to Brazil and for organizing these settlements. We're going to show now some images that are from the 1900s, 1800s, but involves the basic organization that the Polish had in Brazil. They used to work in families, and we have here everybody involved, mothers, sisters, many people at the same time working together, and we can observe Araucaria at the bottom. They had gone to Brazil to especially plant potatoes, wheat, fruits that we didn't have in Brazil. So they were very important because Curitiba in the past was suffering from problems relating to food supply. So Polish were very experienced in Europe by that. And they had migrated with a lot of new techniques, equipment that they put in practice in Brazil, and were very important because today Brazil is very dependent on agriculture, and the Polish were very responsible in the past for introducing new techniques in our country. So we have children involved on this process as well, and a popular architecture that is completely based on Araucaria. Araucaria wooden house represents a unique type of beauty in the world. We don't have, even in Europe, we have some constructions that are similar to that, but using this kind of wood, that's considered one of the best wood for construction because it has no knots and it's more resistant. And Polish saw that as a very special material for building houses like that. This is an old picture, but we still have this kind of houses in the metropolitan area of Curitiba. If you pay attention, everything is made of wood. We have no metals on this kind of house. This is a kind of a first generation house because it imported completely the techniques that the Polish were using in Europe. And then observing that Brazil was not so cold like Poland, they started to adapt this construction. We have here some junctions. They started to adapt this construction to the real conditions that they found in Brazil in terms of humidity, weather, and they started to use processed wood. And these are the Araucaria wooden houses that we still have in Brazil. This is a typical immigrant house that we still find there, and we see Araucarias around it. So we have elements related to religion. So Polish, Italians, Germans were very associated to religion, especially Catholic religion. So we still find this kind of organizations like chapels. And the wood was used for transport as well. Here we have a Krakowian, from Cracovia in Poland, a Krakowian wagon that was very common at the beginning of the last century in Brazil, especially because of the infrastructure was not good at that time. And it was used for different ways, for leisure, work, and many functions. And here is the Curitiba downtown at the beginning of the last century, and we see Polish immigrants selling their products to the population there, especially bread, vegetables, and things associated to the agricultural production. And the transport that we had at that time was based especially on train connecting the coast to Curitiba, that is more or less 1,000 meters high. So we were very dependent on this kind of transport. And the Polish, when they arrived on the coast by means of ships, they got this kind of transport to achieve the final point, the destiny that was Curitiba. We have some images from that time, bridge. This structure still exists. It's still like that. It didn't change anything. And unfortunately, we had a great devastation at that time as well. The wood was used in a massive way that near the railway it was very common to find logs like that organized for being exported, especially for the UK, for Argentina, and the other countries in the road. And this is a current image that we have there. I strongly recommend you to go there one day. It's a very nice trip, and it didn't change from that time till now. No, we have the coast there, and this is the way to Curitiba that is high. It's a very nice trip. Yeah. Today it's used for tourist purpose, but in the past it was especially for transporting people, wood, and a very sad situation that we have from the scenery that we had in 1890 was Parana state was covered by more than 90% of green areas, and more recently, 1980. More or less 100 years later, we have these green areas only, okay? And Araucaria has less than 4% of the total amount that we had in the past. But the Polish were not responsible for that. It was a conjunct of aspects in the process that involved not only immigrants, European immigrants, but the typical Brazilians that were there. Because Brazil has more or less double the age that Australia. We have 516 years. We were discovered, colonized in 1500s. So it's not so recent country, and many people were there before and influenced on this process of devastation. Today we have a population of 205 million people, and only Curitiba, only the capital of Paraná, we have 1.8 million people. If we consider the whole metropolitan area, we have more or less 3.5 million people. So it's bigger than Brisbane and other cities than here. And an interesting aspect. In Paraná, we have 2 million Polish descendants. I'm not a Polish descendant, I'm not from there, I'm from the south of Brazil, but I'm a Spanish descendant. I'm a mix of indigenous and the Spanish descendant, but in Paraná, more than 2 million people are Polish descendants. So it's about 20% of the Paraná population. And it makes Brazil the 3rd place in the world with France in terms of Polish migration. The first city is Chicago in the US, but the second city in the world is Curitiba. But we have Polish in other cities in Brazil that make Brazil to be on the 3rd position. And then we have Russia, because Russia is near comparing to these other countries. Polish were very important to Brazil because we have an agriculture in Brazil that's similar to the Australian one in some aspects, but in others are very different. We have an agriculture that's based in an organization that we call peasant farmer or elementary farmer, where the members of a family work together and in a small production. And this is so important to Brazil that more than 8% of our agricultural production is based on this kind of member, on this kind of agent. We have almost 30 million people involved on this process. So it's a big population. We have 205 million people in Brazil and 300 million people work with this kind of agriculture. And if we pay attention, this population is superior to most of the European countries. It's bigger than, for example, countries like Denmark, Finland. So it's a big, even our colonizer, Portugal, is smaller than this population that's involved with agriculture in Brazil. And my work considered this city here, the capital of Paraná, and the metropolitan area of Curitiba. So we had a lot of colonies, we had a lot of settlements there from the 18th till the moment, and some of them have disappeared because of many problems like real estate speculation, the infrastructure improvement, and many other effects that influenced on this process of disappearing. And that metropolitan region that I've shown you now, we have Curitiba here. This is the urban area. And if you pay attention, these orange and the yellow areas here are the agricultural areas that we have in the metropolitan area of Curitiba. So we have a mix of urban and rural area at the same time in the same place. It's a particular situation that we have in Brazil. It doesn't happen in all Brazilian cities like São Paulo and Rio, for example, because we had this migration from Europeans to there in the last 2 centuries. And these are images related to my work. We still find this kind of construction there. It belongs to the 1st generation of wooden houses in Brazil. This is a Polish house. This is true, but this is part of a 2nd generation. It's a processed house. We have a processed wood used on it. And the kind of agriculture, the basic agriculture, elementary agriculture that we have there, that is developed by families, peasant farmers that work on these properties. And my work involved drawing these properties in a way that I tried to simulate the sensation that the agriculture, the Polish, were doing in front of their properties, the way that they were planting and observing their houses. It was a link that they had from the past to the present. And I used China ink, and I spent some time doing this kind of drawing that were related to my research at that time. So we had another examples here. All of them are Polish houses. These are the houses. This is a kind of a shed, you know? But the property was organized more or less on this way. And I've done some drawings related to them. And not all of them are typically Polish houses. We had some families organized by Polish, Italians, German people, but most of them were Polish houses. And by means of my research, we had the chance of observing events such as nostalgia, traditionalism, and religiosity very strong till the present. And consequences were imposed by urban centers with the growth of industrial activity, real estate speculation, and increased access by means of public transport and other processes. And now, coming back to Australia, my current work is comparing the reality that we had in Brazil involving indigenous people there, especially Polish immigrants, with Aboriginal people in Australia. We have the Bunya Festival that was recorded by Tom Petrie recently. I consider it recently compared to the story that we have in Brazil, 1841, 1920. The festival at the Bunya Range, that today is more known as Blackall Range, the hinterland area of the Sunshine Coast, is a strategical place that I'm paying attention at the moment. And these information were recorded by Tom Petrie in the book called Reminiscences of Early Queensland, written by his daughter, Constance Campbell Petrie. The book is regarded as one of the best authorities on Brisbane's the early days. Maybe you know better than me this book. And we have a photo on this cover. And another book that is very important to understand better the Feast of the Bunya, the festival that involves the Bunya gathering, is another one that was written by Peter Denton. We have a person who works at USC. She's called Beverly Hand. Maybe some of you know her, and she's one of the responsible for organizing the current Bunya Festival here on the Sunshine Coast. The Aborigines' fierce protection of the trees and recognition of the value of the timber led to colonial authorities prohibiting settlers from cutting the trees in the 1842. This is a very serious aspect. The resource was too valuable, and the Aboriginals were driven out of the forests along with the ability to run the festivals. The forests were felled for timber and cleared to make way for cultivation. So we have today more or less this reality on the Sunshine Coast, where the trees are used especially for acoustic guitars, woodworks, and things like that. If you observe here in Australia, more specifically on the Queensland estate, we have this region that we call the Blackall Range. It's more or less North Maleny here. No, it's a big area, and I'm going to concentrate my efforts on it because it's considered the original place where the Aboriginal people started these festivals and the art of being in touch with the Araucaria wooden products, and it's a place where we find a great diversity of Aboriginal people. I'm trying to focus on Gabi and Jinibara people, but the problem is discovering how they were connected in the past, because we don't have so many books and other documents that have registered this relation to Araucaria, to Bunya tree, in a way that can be compared more closely to the Brazilian reality that we had with indigenous people and especially with immigrants that had gone there. And if you maybe you have more information than me in this aspect, but this reality is more or less the reality that we have in Brazil. But in the south of Brazil, it's a bit curious that indigenous people that were there, especially Tupi, Guarani people didn't have this distribution in terms of relation to Araucaria, to the Parana Pine there, that made so complex this process of association that we have here in Australia, that involves many Aboriginal people trying to be in contact with the Bunya tree. And I'm struggling to discover how can I compare these by means of people like Jinibara and Gabi Gabi. And my current research consists of a comparison between the Aboriginal Australians of Southeast Queensland and the Polish immigrant descendants involving Indigenous people too of Curitiba, southern Brazil, considering the connection that they have to two species of Araucariaceae, that is the family, Araucaria Bidwillii here, Bunya Pine, and Araucaria Angustifolia, Parana Pine in Brazil. And I'm trying to analyze these two groups, understanding how their use and the identification towards the Araucaria have developed and generated some similarities between them, even though they were situated in different countries under very different realities. And another goal that I have in my project is observe how some aspects related to nutrition, local culture, identity, and the social organization have been developed in both places. Because we saw that in Brazil it was used for nutrition, but for construction especially. And here in Australia we had many uses for these, but especially for nutrition by Aboriginal people. And for construction, for other products, was especially by means of the migrants that were here. And I take into account such relations have been based on the species found widespread during the Mesozoic era. So it's a very strong separation that we have in terms of continent, of geography, but they are related in material aspects, in very, I would say, human ways that make this tree important to Aboriginal people here and Indigenous people and the Polish immigrants in Brazil. So I'm intending to benefit Australia by means of this research in some ways, trying to multiple value evaluation of Aboriginal communities in Southeast Queensland, discuss this process about the importance of preserving Bunya pines in natural reserves, and contribute to understand in a holistic way the Aboriginal Australians' interaction towards the space, the way that they use the tree, the areas that they have around them to get adapted. And last but not least, implementing ideas to avoid problems like the Parana Pine deforestation that we had in Brazil, making our areas with Araucaria reduced to only 4 or 5% of the total amount that we had in the past. And it make part of the concentration, it involves Paraná state, but in Curitiba we have 4 or 5%. And of the formation of this area, we still consider Parana Pine, the Araucaria, as a local symbol. It's part of our flag, it's part of souvenirs, of things that people still value there, and I think Bunya Pine should be considered, better appreciated here in Southeast Queensland, especially on the Sunshine Coast, not only for tourist purposes, but for many aspects that involves culture, social relations, and Araucaria is so famous in South America, it's so important for people's identity, especially for people who have an indigenous past, like maybe you have heard about Pablo Neruda, a famous Chilean writer, and he had an indigenous past that was involved not with the Araucaria in Brazil, the Parana Pine, but the Araucaria Araucano, the one that I have shown you in Patagonia at the beginning. And he wrote a very beautiful poem related to this, but I emphasize this last part here. The high winter kisses your armor and covers you with destroyed lips. The violent aroma of spring breaks its first in your implacable statue, and grave autumn waits hopelessly to lavish gold in your green stature, representing the situation that Araucaria, in its format and its relation to people and the landscape, had in the past. And I would be very happy if Australians consider their Bunya pines in a different way in order to avoid the problems that we had in Brazil and in South America in general in the past, and making these, I wouldn't say a symbol to Southeast Queensland, but consider this resource, this natural resource, as a natural heritage that we have here, and that is still important for Aboriginal people, but for people who come to Australia to start a new reality, a new context, where Bunya pine is very important for the organization, for the beauty and life, local life, birds, animals in general, and for everybody here. So this is my email and my mobile. If you have some ideas, comments, suggestions, please feel totally free to share that with me. I would be very happy, and thank you very much for your attention.
Well, we've learned a great deal today, haven't we? Many things we didn't know about Alan, so thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
I suspect there will be some questions from the floor, and we could start with Rod, who's always good.
I'm probably stepping into wellness territory here, but I'm very curious to know what was the bird that was eating the seeds of your local pine?
Okay.
And how big are the seeds compared to the Bunya pine seeds?
Well, let me show you. The bird is called gralha azul. Blue, in English I don't know exactly the translation, but it's blue grail, something like that.
It looked like a jai.
Jai? Jai, Well, let me show you. I brought some chocolates. I didn't know there were so many people here, but I'd love to share these chocolates here with you. But the seed that we have there is more or less this size here. And it's almost like that. It's a perfect imitation. It's a perfect imitation made of chocolate for sure, but the seeds are more or less like that. This is a natural seed. No, it's only for decoration, but it's like that. And it was spread by that bird.
Okay. So they're a lot smaller than a bunya nut.
Yes, in general, yeah. But I mean, the reproductive structure in total is bigger than bunya. And the tree is considered the biggest Araucaria that we have there in the world. It can achieve 69 meters. So it's bigger than the bunya tree that we have here. The average size is more or less between 30 and 40 meters, but it can achieve 69 meters. Yeah, it's curious, and the seed is not so big compared to bunya.
How big that bird is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not the size of a peacock.
No. It's a big bird. Yeah.
I'm a historian, and I coincidentally last Saturday, the Polish community of South Australia opened its reinterpretation exhibition, which I curated, on the second overseas Polish settlement in the world, which was in South Australia, which opened 3 years after the one in Texas, which was the first. And it was the only overseas Polish settlement in Australia. And the Poles arrived with the Germans who came first to South Australia in the late 1830s. And they moved up in the 1850s to this area, which is a very famous wine region now, and it actually is now formally called Polish Hill River. And but what really struck me really about your comparisons in some ways, in southern Australia at least, the tree that's the iconic tree both for the Indigenous peoples of southern Australia and for its use as a structural timber by the Poles, the Germans and everyone else is Reproductive Structures, Camalduensis. So that's the tree that's iconic and that is actually can be found for all the uses. I was really struck by the fact that you don't hear much about the constructional use of Araucaria. Maybe it's just because it's not so extensive. River comes right through southern Australia. So in some ways it seems to me the comparisons might be between the
social aspects.
well, either the indigenous use of Araucaria in Brazil and here, or else, as you talked about, the immigrant European use of structural timbers and other purposes.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. Thank you.
My name is John Bartley, I'm an agricultural engineer. I'm also interested in trees. I've been involved in plantation developments all over the world. And there's an interesting comparison between the introduction of all the Araucarias from South America into Australia, apart from the indigenous ones here. There's a lot of them that I've only seen them in gardens in Australia and also in parts of Chile and Argentina and Queensland. But was there a actual plan to bring these species into Australia in the, say, the mid-19th century?
If it was planned to spread the species here?
Well, there's a lot of species, Araucaria species,
Yes.
growing in Australia that aren't indigenous.
Yes. Yeah. We have these, I would say, typical indigenous species there, but here in Australia, on this region, especially Bunya tree, have this kind of connection directly to festivals, social manifests. And I don't know exactly if there are more trees or natural resources that are related on this way to Aboriginal people here in Brazil, in Australia, sorry. But in Brazil, we have more trees that are part of the indigenous local culture there that were responsible for construction, the indigenous construction in Brazil, because Araucaria was not used by indigenous for construction there, only Polish immigrants, Europeans in general. But here in Australia, the connection that they had with the tree, the Bunya tree, was completely different, especially used for nutrition. And indigenous people there, they had used for nutrition, but they had used the Parana Pine for a way of identifying their areas, their territories. The limits between tribes was used by Araucarias as a signal for separating one tribe from the other. And they had this used there because they were usually grown in very high areas, and it was a kind of identification that you could easily identify from one place to the other. You're welcome.
So, start to say that the Australian Garden History Society is a great, the Australian Garden History Society is a great source for information about all aspects of that and natural ecology and vegetation. Yeah. So that might be worth. I was checking the Queensland branches site. That might be worth checking.
Very basic question. How long does it take such a tree to grow to 40 meters? 40 meters. The average size, it takes more or less. It takes more than 40 years. More than 40 years to achieve this mature size. Yeah, more than 40 years. It depends on the region, on the conditions. This tree in Brazil requires a lot of humidity. It grows only in very high places, more than 700 meters high. So it needs a lot of humidity. It's not like here in Australia that we don't need such conditions, no, but surely more than 40 years to achieve the mature size.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was just wondering how cold it gets in the wintertime at, say, 1,000 meters down there.
Mm-hmm. Today we have climate change, especially in very urban areas like Curitiba, but it's possible to get -7, -2 in urban areas like Curitiba. But if you go to countryside, like if I would compare like hinterlands here, we would get -10 during the winter, -10. But the average temperature is between 2 and 10 during the winter. It's a cool weather, but it can achieve -7, -10.
So the indigenous people in the area, what did they live in at the time? Were they in a house of some description, or in tents, or, you know?
Yeah. They had a specific designed houses for surviving at these conditions, but some of them used to migrate during these winter periods. It happened a lot. It happened a lot, and we have a lot of geological forms in Paraná. So if you observe, if you I don't know if you remember, but that image that we have on the train, no, it's a completely different geological organization. On the coast we have cool temperature, not like Sunshine Coast. I think it's cooler than here, but we have cooler temperatures there that allow indigenous people, to resist longer to this kind of conditions during the winter, for example. So in the summer or spring, they used to migrate to high areas again. But it was more or less the organization that they had in the past. Yeah.
No, I don't. I noticed by the shape of the trees, the lower curved limb is so long and obviously must be heavy, and it's quite thin, the branch. Not windy areas, you'd think they'd crack off, and they're quite long, and obviously the leaves or whatever on the end of them must be quite heavy, that clump of that. Mm-hmm. But, and they're so high, they must get a lot of wind and it must whip around. It seems to be strangely built, whereas ours are more, I don't know, it just looks like they might crack off in the wind. No wind where they blow? Yeah.
No. It's considered safe. Yeah. It's.
I didn't mean that. I just mean it's a beautiful shape.
Yeah.
And it looks like it could crack off. I'm always looking for the different things.
No. I've never heard anything about that. Yeah. It's a bit curious. Yes.
Beautifully built.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very.
Like ours, they're so distinctive. You can pick them out anywhere from any other pine.
Yes. Yes. It's a reference in terms of construction. Yeah. But many people certainly have passed away on this process of construction, this infrastructure. Yeah, it's
the seeds. Are the seeds really? Because our bunyas, I mean, Lord love a duck, they're so hard to get open. But the actual.
Yeah, if you want to try, please feel free. This is from Brazil, so this is a chocolate. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to bring the original seed, but maybe one day you'll have the chance of trying it. But it's very similar to these chocolates there. Very similar in size and color.
Such a heavy outside skin.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've just about exhausted the questions at this stage. And I'd like to say thank you to Alan.
Thank you, Chu. Thank you so much.
Before you rush away, there is another lady who'd like to have a few words with you, so if you can come forward. But I'd like to say very much, Alan.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Beautiful gift.
Something to take back to Brazil.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
And,
thank you.
Really appreciate. What a fabulous presentation. Wasn't it amazing?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chu. Oh, thank you so much.
When do you finish?
In February.
February. So you've got a little bit of time. That's marvelous. All right. I'm sorry, I don't know the same name. Michelle, could I ask you to just have a few words with Michelle?
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Chu.
Hello, everyone. I'm local. I was born in Noosa Heads. I'm Michelle Freeman, I'm Emma Freeman's daughter, and Emma Freeman wrote a book called Hastings Street Stories from Noosa's Past. It's the heritage of all the early Noosa families. And she put a lot of work into this book. This is the second edition, and the reason why I came here today, and I'm very proud of this book, was my sister and I, that's Elissa Freeman and myself, we're holding a book launch tomorrow at 3:30 in the Noosa Library. And everyone's welcome. There'll be refreshments and there'll be a few speeches and lovely heritage photos of Noosa heads from 1949. So it should be a nice production. Come along at 3:30 at the Noosa Library tomorrow for the book launch.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. And please remember, there's no forum next week. We're going on holiday. But you will be most welcome back here on September the 16th. September the 16th is our next forum, so please don't forget to come along for that. So goodbye and have a wonderful Noosa show day. Goodbye.